Ethan Cole is a man who seems to have it all: wealth, power, and success. But when he unexpectedly finds his mother, Grace, working as a janitor in his own office building, everything he's built begins to feel hollow. This chance encounter pulls Ethan back into a family he left behind, revealing debts, hidden sacrifices, and a struggling younger brother he barely knows. As Ethan confronts the true cost of his success, he's forced to rethink what really matters. Together with his mother and brother, he begins an inspiring journey to repair their fractured bonds and build a legacy rooted in dignity and compassion. If you believe in stories of redemption and family, don't miss this one. Subscribe to our channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us as we follow Ethan's journey to rediscovering the true meaning of success. Ethan Cole tightened his tie, studying his reflection in the mirror. His tailored suit, perfectly pressed, fit him like a glove, a stark contrast to the baggy hand-me-downs he wore as a child. His office walls, decorated with awards and framed articles detailing his journey to success, reinforced the image he had carefully built: a self-made man. The walls whispered of accomplishments, resilience, grit, the perfect formula to success. But sometimes, the quiet of his office seemed to echo back something different: an emptiness, or maybe a quiet dissonance between the image he projected and the parts of himself he had buried along the way. A quick glance at his watch reminded him that his morning meeting was about to start. Grabbing his briefcase, Ethan walked out with his usual confident stride, ignoring the faint twinge of weariness that had begun to creep into his bones lately. He brushed it off as just the price of success. The morning passed in a blur of presentations and strategic discussions. His company had recently secured a promising tech patent, and the entire office buzzed with anticipation. Investors, business partners, even some local government officials, everyone was reaching out for a piece of Ethan's attention. It was exactly what he'd worked so hard to achieve, yet he felt oddly disconnected from it all. After a morning of meetings, he headed back to his office. Megan had texted him a reminder about tonight's charity gala, a high-profile event organized by one of his largest investors. Megan loved these events, loved the way people's eyes trailed over them as they entered the room, the whispers of admiration, the carefully controlled envy. He glanced down at his phone, another text lighting up his screen. This one, however, wasn't from Megan. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Just wanted to see if you might be free for lunch this weekend. It's been a while since we caught up, and I'd love to hear about your latest projects. Love, Mom." Ethan stared at the message, feeling a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had lunch with his mother, the last time he'd even seen her in person. Since he'd left home, their interactions had mostly been reduced to quick calls and monthly transfers, gestures he convinced himself were enough. He quickly typed a response, his fingers hovering over the screen. Mom, let me check my schedule and get back to you." But he didn't hit send. Instead, he closed the message and slipped his phone back into his pocket. That evening, as he adjusted his cufflinks in preparation for the gala, Megan entered the room, her face lighting up at the sight of him in his tuxedo. "You look perfect," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ready to dazzle?" He smiled, though his mind still lingered on the message from his mother. She hadn't called or texted again, but he knew she wouldn't. She never wanted to intrude on his life, even though he knew she wanted to be more a part of it. During the car ride to the gala, he mentioned it to Megan. "Mom texted earlier," he said casually, watching for her reaction. Megan raised an eyebrow, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Oh, she wanted to have lunch this weekend," he continued, his voice hesitant. "It's been a while since I've seen her." Megan's smile was polite, but tinged with a certain impatience. "Honey, you know how busy you are. I'm sure she understands. Besides, a gift or a nice bouquet would mean so much more to her. We could send one with a thoughtful message. It's what people in your position do." Ethan nodded slowly. Megan's world had always been one of etiquette and measured words, of gestures that symbolized connection without requiring the actual commitment. He was starting to realize how much that world had reshaped his own. The following weekend, Ethan kept up the pretense, telling himself he would find the time for that lunch. But between last-minute calls, a few unexpected investor meetings, and a charity golf tournament, his schedule filled up quickly. He texted his mother a short message, letting her know he couldn't make it. Instead, he arranged for flowers to be sent to her with a handwritten card that read, "Thinking of you, Mom. Hope we can catch up soon." As he signed it, he convinced himself it was enough. She'd be happy, he told himself. It's what she wanted, just a small sign that he cared. But that night, amid laughter, drinks, and an endless swirl of introductions, a small image flashed in his mind, a vision of his mother alone in her small apartment, probably sitting by the window, looking out at the city. The thought nagged at him throughout the evening, dimming his enthusiasm. He tried to shake it off, joining Megan's circle of acquaintances and participating in the discussions, but that lingering feeling wouldn't leave him. The next week, back at work, Ethan was on his way to a client meeting when he took a shortcut down a side hallway. The main elevators were crowded, so he used the service route, something he rarely did. As he approached the restroom area, he slowed, noticing a woman hunched over, scrubbing the floor. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each scrub of the brush echoing in the quiet hallway. Her gray hair was tied back, strands slipping free, framing a face etched with lines he recognized all too well. It was his mother, Grace. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing, grappling with disbelief. He watched her wipe a bead of sweat from her forehead, her eyes focused on a stubborn stain that refused to lift. Her back was bent, her hands reddened from the effort, and he could see exhaustion etched into every movement. He wanted to say something, to call out to her, but a wave of shame held him back. He realized he had no idea what she would think of him, seeing her like this, what he himself felt seeing her like this. After all his success, his mother was cleaning floors in the very building he owned, a silent and unseen part of the empire he had built. Unable to take it any longer, he backed away, retreating down the hallway. He fled to his office, closing the door and leaning against it, his breath coming in shallow gasps. For years, he had done everything in his power to keep his past behind him. But in that moment, everything he'd tried to escape had resurfaced in stark, undeniable clarity. He hadn't just left his past behind. He'd left his mother behind too. Ethan couldn't get the image of his mother out of his mind. He sat in his office, his thoughts returning again and again to the sight of Grace on her knees, working quietly and alone. A discomfort he couldn't ignore began settling into his chest, something that seemed to dig deeper with each passing hour. It was strange. He'd built his life on values of independence, success, and ambition, and yet all of it now seemed hollow. All the meetings, the deals, the accolades felt strangely disconnected from the person he saw himself becoming. Unable to focus, he canceled his afternoon meetings and left the office, hoping a walk around the city might clear his head. But each time he passed a store window or a reflective surface, he saw his own image staring back at him, an image that felt foreign, out of place. He wasn't the man he once was, the man his mother had worked tirelessly to support. That evening, Ethan returned to his penthouse apartment. Megan was out at an event, and the emptiness in the high-ceilinged rooms was oppressive. He poured himself a glass of water and pulled out his phone, opening his text messages. His last exchange with his mother, a brief apology for missing lunch, was there, a stark reminder of his choice to stay distant. Why hadn't she told him she was working here? Why hadn't she said she needed help? His mind swirled with questions he'd never thought to ask before. He realized he knew almost nothing about his mother's current life. A woman he had once depended on for everything had become a distant figure in his life. After a moment's hesitation, he called her. "Hello, Ethan." Her voice came through, calm and reassuring, as if she hadn't just been working herself to exhaustion hours earlier. "Hi, Mom," he replied, feeling an odd knot in his throat. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "Oh, I'm doing fine, honey. Just keeping busy." Her words were light, but he could sense a hint of weariness behind them. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were working at the company?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a quiet sigh. "Oh, Ethan, I didn't want to worry you. You have so much going on already, and I'm just keeping myself busy. It's not a big deal, really." "Mom, it is a big deal," he replied, his voice strained. "You shouldn't have to do this. I send you money every month. Why are you still working so hard?" Grace hesitated, and he could sense she was searching for the right words. The money helps, of course, but there are things you don't know, things I haven't wanted to bother you with. Her voice faltered, and Ethan felt an unfamiliar pang of helplessness. This was his mother, the one person who had always been there, silently supporting him. And now she was shouldering burdens he hadn't known existed. "Mom, please," he said softer now. "I want to help. Whatever you need, just tell me." But Grace only sighed again, her tone gentle. "Ethan, you've done more than enough. Don't worry about me. I'm managing just fine." After a few more minutes of polite, inconsequential conversation, they said their goodbyes. Ethan ended the call, but he was left feeling more unsettled than ever. He realized he was facing a truth he'd ignored for too long. He didn't really know his mother's life anymore, and he didn't know how to change that. The following weekend, Megan arranged for another bouquet of flowers to be sent to Grace. She insisted it would be a kind gesture, a way of showing appreciation from a distance. "Your mother understands you're busy, Ethan. She wouldn't want you to drop everything to visit." But as the days went by, the flowers started to feel like hollow gestures. Ethan couldn't shake the thought that he was simply using them to keep her at arm's length. Every time he signed a card or approved a gift, he wondered if it was doing anything other than pushing her further away. One night, while Megan was out, he found himself standing in his living room, looking at the city lights. His mind drifted back to the dimly lit hallway in his building, to the image of Grace on her knees, scrubbing the floor. He felt a painful pull in his chest, as if a part of himself were tied to that hallway, to that moment. It was time to confront the truth he had been avoiding. He had built his life on the foundation of his mother's sacrifices, and he'd done so without ever truly understanding the toll it had taken on her. Early the next morning, Ethan called his mother again, this time with more resolve. "Mom, I'd like to come by this weekend. I know I missed last time, but I want to see you." Grace hesitated, but she finally agreed. "That would be nice, Ethan. I'd love to catch up." When he hung up, he felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. It had been too long since he'd sat across from her, listened to her, and truly engaged with her life. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but he knew he couldn't keep ignoring this part of himself any longer. The week dragged by, each day feeling heavier than the last. He managed to get through meetings and conference calls, but his mind was elsewhere, already with his mother in that modest apartment. Megan noticed his distracted state, and on Thursday night, she confronted him. "Honey, you've been acting strange all week. What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, debating how much to share. "I've just been thinking about my mom. I'm planning to visit her this weekend." Megan's face softened, but there was a hint of something else, a flicker of disappointment or perhaps irritation. "Well, if that's what you need to do. But we have the investors' brunch Saturday morning, remember?" He'd forgotten, but he couldn't bring himself to change his plans. "I'll be back in time. This is something I have to do." She sighed, glancing at him with an expression that was hard to read. "All right, Ethan, but don't lose sight of everything we've built. You've come so far." As she walked away, he felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the growing determination within him. Whatever lay ahead, he had to face it head on. On Saturday morning, Ethan drove across the city to his mother's apartment. The familiar streets and buildings seemed distant, remnants of a world he had once known but had since left behind. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, his mind racing with memories he hadn't thought of in years. When he finally arrived, he stood outside the apartment building for a moment, taking in the sight of the worn bricks and chipped paint. It felt both foreign and familiar, a place he had once called home, but had since outgrown. Grace opened the door with a warm smile, though her face showed signs of fatigue. She led him inside, where the furniture was modest but well kept, each piece carrying a story from his childhood. The air smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that instantly took him back to summer afternoons when she cleaned while he played. "Sit down, Ethan," she said, gesturing to the worn couch. "Can I get you some tea?" He nodded, settling onto the couch as she moved about the small kitchen. He looked around, noting the faded wallpaper and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was a far cry from the luxury he was used to, but it felt more real, more grounded than anything he'd known in years. Grace returned with 2 mugs of tea, and they sat together, the silence stretching between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything you've done for me. The sacrifices you made, all the work you did. I don't know if I ever really understood it." Grace gave him a small smile, her eyes softening. "Oh, Ethan, there's nothing to thank me for. I did what any mother would do. But you're still working so hard," he continued, his voice tight with emotion. "You shouldn't have to. I want to help, Mom. Let me take some of this burden off your shoulders." She placed a gentle hand on his. Her touch is warm and comforting as he remembered. "I appreciate that, Ethan, but it's not just about the money. I've been carrying things you don't know about, things I didn't want you to worry about." He listened as she shared pieces of her life he'd never known. The struggles, the quiet resilience, the sacrifices that had gone unseen for years. With each word, he felt a weight settle over him, the realization of how deeply she had shielded him from the hardships she endured. As he left that day, Ethan felt both humbled and inspired. His mother had given him everything, and he had taken it all for granted. But now, he was determined to make it right, to find a way to honor her sacrifices, not just in words but in actions. Returning home after his visit with Grace, Ethan felt like a stranger in his own life. The luxury of his apartment, the sprawling city views, and even the silence that had once felt so satisfying now seemed hollow. The image of his mother's modest apartment, with its worn furniture and faded wallpaper, haunted him, a sharp reminder of the sacrifices she'd made. In the days that followed, Ethan became increasingly preoccupied with finding out more about Grace's life. He reached out to his company's human resources team, requesting to see the employment records for temporary staff. When he finally saw his mother's name listed as a janitor, he felt a pang of guilt so deep it almost winded him. As he read further, he realized she'd been picking up extra shifts, often working late nights. The hours she'd worked were far more than he'd ever imagined. And then something caught his eye. Her wages barely covered what he sent her monthly. Questions filled his mind. What was she doing with the money he sent? Why would she still be struggling financially? Determined to find out, he arranged another meeting with his mother, this time prepared to dig deeper into the reasons behind her circumstances. Ethan visited Grace's apartment once again, his resolve strengthening with every step. She welcomed him with her usual warm smile, though her eyes held a weariness he hadn't noticed before. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he began, trying to keep his tone gentle but firm. She nodded, settling into the armchair across from him. "Of course, Ethan. What's on your mind?" He hesitated, gathering his thoughts. "I looked into your job at my company. I saw the hours you work, and I need to know why. I send money every month, yet you're working so hard. I want to help, but I need to understand what's going on." Grace looked down, clasping her hands together. After a moment, she sighed. "It's not easy to explain, Ethan. I didn't want you to worry about it." "Mom, please," he pressed gently. "If I don't know, I can't help." With a deep breath, Grace began to talk. She spoke of years of hardship, of the debt she had accrued trying to make ends meet after Ethan's father had left. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it that told him these were wounds she'd held inside for too long. "When your father left," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "he left us with debts and little to live on. I worked as much as I could to support you and your brother, but there was only so much I could do." Ethan listened, feeling a growing ache in his chest. He had always believed his father had died when he was young, but now he realized his mother had hidden the truth to protect him. "But that's not the whole reason I kept working," Grace added, her voice softening. "Your brother, James, has had his own struggles. He fell into trouble, and he's needed help. I couldn't abandon him, Ethan. I'm his mother, too." Ethan felt a swirl of emotions: shock, anger, guilt, and a profound sadness. His brother, who he had long been estranged from, was the reason his mother continued to work such grueling hours. The brother he had left behind to pursue his dreams was still very much a part of his mother's life. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. Grace looked at him, her gaze filled with a mixture of love and resignation. "I didn't want to burden you, Ethan. You worked so hard to build a new life, and I wanted you to have it without carrying this weight." Ethan could barely speak, the enormity of what she'd endured pressing down on him. His mother had carried the burdens of both her sons, sacrificing her own comfort so he could live his dreams, all while keeping the truth hidden. Over the next few days, Ethan felt his world shift. The realization of his mother's sacrifices stayed with him, gnawing at his mind and heart. He began reevaluating his choices, the ways he had distanced himself from his family. He thought back to the years he'd spent climbing the corporate ladder, oblivious to the struggles his mother had faced. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan returned home to find Megan waiting for him in the living room. Her expression was tense, her arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said, her tone clipped. "You've been distant lately, and I want to know what's going on." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He'd anticipated this conversation, but hadn't prepared for it. "I've just been thinking about my mom, about everything she's gone through. I didn't realize how hard it's been for her." Megan's face softened, but there was a hint of impatience. "Ethan, she's proud of you. She wouldn't want you to be distracted from your work. You've worked too hard to get here." "But that's just it, Megan," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "I've been so focused on work that I've ignored the people who mean the most to me. My mother's been struggling, and I've been too wrapped up in my own life to see it." Megan sighed, shaking her head. "Ethan, you're a success. People look up to you. Getting too involved with family issues, it could affect everything we've built. Maybe you should just keep things simple. Send her a little extra, make sure she's comfortable, and move on." Her words struck him, a reminder of the polished, image-focused life they had created together. For the first time, he wondered if it was a life he truly wanted. Fueled by a determination to understand his family's struggles, Ethan decided to reach out to James. Their last encounter had been years ago, strained and hostile, and they had grown up to be almost complete strangers. He called Grace, asking for James's address, and after some reluctance, she provided it. The neighborhood was rougher than he remembered, a stark contrast to the life Ethan now led. As he parked and made his way to James's apartment, he felt an unease settle over him. This was the world he had left behind, a world his brother still lived in. James opened the door reluctantly, his eyes widening slightly when he saw Ethan. They exchanged awkward greetings, each unsure how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. After a few tense moments, Ethan spoke. "James, I just wanted to talk. I know things have been rough, and I want to help." James let out a bitter laugh, his gaze hardening. "Help? You? The guy who left us behind to live his perfect life?" Ethan winced at the accusation, but he kept his voice steady. "I know I haven't been around, but that's why I'm here. I want to understand what's been happening. I want to be part of this family again." James's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained wary. "You don't get it, Ethan. You left. Mom's the only one who's ever been there for me. And now you just show up, expecting to fix everything." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his brother's resentment. He realized this was a wound that wouldn't heal overnight, and that James's anger was justified. "I know I can't fix everything," he replied quietly, "but I want to try, for Mom's sake and for ours." The tension hung between them, a silent acknowledgement of the years they had lost. For now, it was all they could manage, but Ethan knew it was a start. Ethan returned to his apartment that night, his mind and heart heavy with the weight of his family's burdens. Megan was already asleep, and he slipped into bed beside her, staring at the ceiling as thoughts raced through his mind. He had spent so long building a life he thought he wanted, only to realize it had cost him his family. The success, the wealth, the prestige, all of it felt hollow in the face of his mother's sacrifices, his brother's struggles. And as he lay there, he decided he would do whatever it took to help his family, to rebuild the connections he had so carelessly broken. Even if it meant changing everything he had once believed was important, he was ready to face it. He would no longer let his mother bear the weight alone, nor would he turn his back on his brother. In the quiet of the night, Ethan felt the beginnings of a new purpose, one rooted not in ambition, but in love, loyalty, and redemption. In the days following his decision, Ethan threw himself into finding ways to support his mother and reconnect with his brother. He arranged to increase the financial assistance he sent Grace, hoping it might ease some of her burdens. However, he knew money alone would not solve everything. He needed to be present to understand her struggles and earn back the trust he had lost over the years. Meanwhile, at the office, Ethan noticed subtle but unsettling changes. His manager, Ryan Foster, seemed to be taking on more responsibilities than usual, assuming tasks Ethan hadn't delegated. It was almost as though Ryan were trying to establish himself as the primary figure in the company, a shift Ethan hadn't authorized or even been consulted on. Ethan scheduled a meeting with Ryan, wanting to discuss his growing concerns. "Ryan," he began, keeping his tone professional, "I've noticed you've been handling a lot on your own lately. I appreciate your initiative, but let's make sure we're communicating regularly. I want to be informed on all major decisions." Ryan nodded, but his smile was tight, almost calculating. "Of course, Ethan. I'm just trying to lighten your load. I know you've had some personal matters on your mind." Ethan tensed, sensing a thinly veiled suggestion in Ryan's words. He managed a polite nod, but as Ryan left, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He made a mental note to keep a closer watch on him going forward. Over the following weeks, Ryan's influence within the company only seemed to grow. Employees started going directly to Ryan with questions and concerns, bypassing Ethan entirely. He noticed Ryan giving presentations to potential clients, often making subtle adjustments to company policies that hadn't been approved. One afternoon, Ethan overheard a conversation between two employees discussing Ryan's recent promotion. Shocked, he interrupted to clarify that no such promotion had occurred, and the employees, visibly startled, quickly apologized, admitting they had been under the impression that Ryan was now handling most of the executive responsibilities. Ethan's suspicions deepened. He knew he needed to regain control over his company, but with everything happening in his personal life, it felt like he was fighting battles on multiple fronts. Ryan's behavior felt calculated, as though he were waiting for the right moment to seize control. After seeing his mother again one weekend, Ethan decided to visit her at the office late one evening. He wanted to see firsthand what her day-to-day life was like in the company he had built. As he arrived at the building, he entered through a back entrance, hoping to remain unnoticed. As he walked down the hall, he caught sight of Grace working in a dimly lit corridor, her back bent as she scrubbed the floor. He approached, clearing his throat softly so as not to startle her. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you, to understand what you're dealing with here," he replied, his gaze scanning the area around them. "You shouldn't be doing this alone, Mom. Not here, not like this." Grace hesitated, glancing around nervously. "I don't mind the work, Ethan. It keeps me active. And well, it's just what I know." "But you don't have to do this anymore," he said, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and sadness. "I'm here to help now. I want you to have a better life." Just then, Ryan appeared from around the corner, his face registering surprise and perhaps something else when he saw Ethan and Grace together. Recovering quickly, he stepped forward with a carefully practiced smile. "Ethan, I didn't expect to see you here so late," Ryan said smoothly. "And Grace, I trust everything is going well?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. There was something unsettling about the way Ryan addressed his mother, a tone that hinted at authority and perhaps even condescension. He placed a protective arm around Grace, not breaking eye contact with Ryan. "I think we have a lot to discuss, Ryan," Ethan replied, his voice cold. After the uncomfortable encounter, Ethan felt compelled to investigate Ryan's intentions further. Over the next few days, he combed through company records, looking for signs of unauthorized actions. He discovered that Ryan had been making deals with external clients and approving contracts without consulting him, decisions that placed the company at risk. His anger simmered. He knew he had trusted Ryan implicitly, allowing him too much leeway, but now it was clear that trust had been misplaced. When he confronted Ryan directly, the response was surprisingly blunt. "Ethan, I've only been doing what I thought was best for the company," Ryan said with a casual shrug. "With everything going on in your personal life, I figured I could handle the decisions that required immediate attention." Ethan's eyes darkened. That wasn't your call to make, Ryan. This is my company, and no personal matter gives you the right to overstep your role. Ryan gave him a long, assessing look. I understand, Ethan, but just remember companies don't survive on loyalty alone. Sometimes, difficult decisions need to be made. The veiled threat in his words didn't go unnoticed. Ethan realized that Ryan wasn't simply ambitious. He was actively working against him, positioning himself as a potential replacement. As tension between them mounted, Ethan noticed a troubling shift in public perception. A local media outlet ran an expose on his family background, focusing on his father's abandonment, his brother's struggles, and his mother's work as a janitor at his company. The article painted a picture of Ethan as a businessman who had neglected his roots and abandoned his family. The scandal hit him hard. His company's reputation took an immediate hit, with partners and clients withdrawing their support. Megan, furious about the damage to their public image, demanded answers, pressuring him to publicly distance himself from his family. Ethan, this is too much. You need to make a statement. Clear your name. People are starting to talk, she insisted, her voice tight with frustration. I'm not abandoning my family, he replied, his voice steady. Not again. I know what that cost me, and I won't do it. Megan shook her head, her eyes narrowing. If you keep this up, you're going to lose everything we worked for. I don't want to be dragged down by this. Make a choice, Ethan. Her ultimatum hung in the air, leaving him with a bitter sense of clarity. The life he had built was indeed crumbling, but for the first time, he realized he couldn't continue living it on someone else's terms. He had spent too long sacrificing his own values for success, and now he was ready to choose his family. In the wake of the scandal, Grace became a source of unexpected strength for Ethan. She reassured him, reminding him that his true character was not defined by public opinion, but by his actions and integrity. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring him to take a stand, regardless of the consequences. I've lived my life in the shadows, Ethan, Grace said softly. People may judge us, but they don't know the whole story. We don't have to prove anything to anyone but ourselves. Buoyed by her support, Ethan decided to address the scandal head-on. He prepared a public statement, explaining his family's journey and his commitment to honoring his mother's sacrifices. It wasn't an easy decision, but he knew it was the right one. He would rather lose everything than lose himself again. In a final conversation, Ethan and Megan confronted the rift that had grown between them. Megan, still insistent on maintaining their public image, expressed disappointment at his decisions. He realized, however, that her priorities lay not with him, but with the life they had created, an illusion built on appearances. Megan, he said quietly, we both know that this isn't working. Maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways. She didn't argue. Their marriage, it seemed, had always been more of a partnership than a true union. As she left, he felt a sense of freedom, albeit tinged with sadness. It was a painful end to a chapter of his life, but it marked the beginning of something new, something more real. With Megan gone and his company's future uncertain, Ethan turned his full attention to his family. He met with Grace and James, sharing his plans to establish a foundation dedicated to helping custodial workers and low-income families. The foundation, he explained, would serve as a tribute to Grace and the sacrifices she had made. James was skeptical at first, but Ethan assured him that this was a sincere effort, not another attempt at redemption through wealth. I'm not doing this to fix the past, James, he said earnestly. I'm doing it because I want our family to have a future, one we can all be proud of. Slowly, James's hardened exterior softened, and he agreed to join Ethan's effort, albeit with caution. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for the foundation, reaching out to communities and organizations that could benefit from their support. In the weeks following the scandal, Ethan poured his energy into setting up the foundation he had envisioned. He named it Grace and Dignity Foundation in honor of his mother, emphasizing that it would work to improve the conditions of janitorial and custodial staff, as well as provide resources for families facing financial hardship. The name was a tribute, not only to his mother's strength, but to the value he had come to understand that dignity in work is a human right. Ethan's determination grew with every meeting, every late night spent drafting plans and gathering contacts. His work with the foundation gave him something his company had never provided: a sense of genuine fulfillment, a belief that he was creating something that truly mattered. He invited Grace to join him in building the foundation, though she hesitated at first, uncomfortable with the idea of being in the spotlight. After some persuasion, however, she agreed to help, seeing it as a way to give back and make a difference for others who had struggled in silence. Ethan knew that if the foundation were to truly reflect the spirit of family and resilience, he would need James by his side. Reconnecting had not been easy. James's resentment was still evident, and they had yet to fully bridge the gap between them. But Ethan was determined to keep reaching out, offering support without judgment. After a few awkward meetings, Ethan asked James if he'd consider working with the foundation, especially with at-risk youth. He knew that James's experiences, though painful, had given him insights that could make a real difference for others who felt lost or disconnected. James was hesitant, wary of Ethan's intentions, but he saw something new in his brother, a sincerity he hadn't recognized before. Slowly, he began to open up, expressing both his fears and his hopes, admitting that he too wanted a life with more purpose. "All those years, I blamed you for leaving, for making it out while I stayed behind," James confessed during one of their conversations. "I thought you had it all figured out, that you didn't care about us." Ethan shook his head, his expression solemn. "I was wrong too, James. I thought I had to keep pushing forward, to leave everything behind so I could succeed. But it cost me my family, and it cost me my own peace. I don't want that life anymore." That conversation marked a turning point. Although the road to complete reconciliation was long, they had taken the first steps toward understanding and rebuilding the bond that had once been so fractured. With both Grace and James on board, the Grace and Dignity Foundation began to take shape. They held planning sessions, often late into the night, where they brainstormed ways to support workers, offer financial literacy programs, and provide scholarships for children of custodial staff. They reached out to local organizations and unions, building partnerships that would amplify their impact. James found a role within the foundation as a mentor to young people from difficult backgrounds. His own experiences with hardship and his path toward recovery resonated with the youth he worked with, giving him a sense of belonging and purpose he hadn't felt in years. Grace, meanwhile, became the foundation's heart. Her humility and kindness inspired everyone around her. She spoke at small gatherings, sharing her story not as a plea for sympathy, but as an example of resilience and strength. Her presence lent the foundation an authenticity that made others want to join their cause. As word of the foundation spread, so did interest from the media. Reporters who had once criticized Ethan's past began covering his story from a new angle, highlighting his commitment to making a difference. Articles framed the foundation's mission as one of redemption and advocacy, showcasing how Ethan had transformed a personal crisis into a movement for social good. One day, a journalist asked Ethan directly about his shift in priorities. "Your life has changed significantly in recent months," the journalist noted. "What would you say to those who see this foundation as an attempt to repair your image?" Ethan paused, his expression thoughtful. "I'd say they're right, in a way. I made mistakes, big ones, and I lost sight of what really mattered. But this foundation isn't about my image. It's about honoring my mother's sacrifices and building something meaningful with my family. That's the real success I'm after now." The journalist's article resonated with readers, and support for the foundation began to grow. People from all walks of life reached out, some sharing their own stories of struggle, others offering resources and donations. The Grace and Dignity Foundation was becoming a beacon of hope, not only for janitorial staff, but for anyone who felt undervalued or overlooked. Through their shared work, the Cole family began to heal. Ethan, Grace, and James found a rhythm in their new roles, a sense of unity that had been absent for so long. They learned to communicate openly, their conversations filled with honesty and understanding. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraiser, Ethan and James shared a quiet moment together. "You know, I never thought I'd be doing something like this," James admitted, his gaze distant but warm. "Helping other people, it feels good. Real." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, James. You're doing amazing work. I couldn't have done any of this without you and Mom." Their words were simple, but in that moment, they both knew they were finally starting to see each other not as distant family members, but as true allies and friends. At the Foundation's first large event, Grace took the stage to share her story. She spoke with humility, describing her journey as a single mother and the years she had spent working tirelessly to provide for her family. She didn't dwell on the hardships, but focused on the strength she had found through them, the lessons she had learned, and the pride she felt for her sons. "My work may have gone unseen for many years," she said, her voice steady and calm. "But I always knew that every task, every moment had a purpose. Now, I'm grateful to stand here and see that purpose come to life through this foundation." Her words moved the audience, and by the time she stepped down, many were visibly moved. Ethan watched from the side of the stage, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He realized that the admiration he saw in the eyes of others was nothing compared to the pride he felt for his mother's unwavering strength and grace. As the foundation grew, so did its reach. It expanded beyond their original vision, offering educational workshops, financial counseling, and partnerships with local businesses to provide stable jobs for those in need. Ethan's connections from his corporate life helped the foundation secure resources, and he saw how his past achievements could now serve a greater purpose. James took on more responsibility, helping design programs for youth who were at risk of falling into difficult paths. His story of resilience and transformation became a powerful tool, and he found fulfillment in helping others avoid the mistakes he had once made. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a genuine sense of accomplishment, one rooted not in personal gain, but in the positive change they were making in others' lives. He understood now that this was what his mother had hoped for all along, that he would use his success to uplift others rather than simply amass wealth. As the foundation continued to thrive, so did the Cole family. They had each found a role, a purpose, and a sense of belonging that transcended past wounds. Their journey was not one of flawless redemption, but of honest, sometimes painful reconciliation, a journey they had taken together. One day, Ethan took his mother back to the small park where they had spent so many afternoons when he was a child. They sat on a bench, watching families pass by, children laughing and playing in the autumn light. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for everything. I don't know if I can ever fully repay you, but I hope I've made you proud." Grace smiled, her eyes warm with love and understanding. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan. You're my son, and I'm proud of the man you've become. We've all come a long way, and this is just the beginning." They sat in peaceful silence, both knowing that the journey they had taken together had changed them in ways they could never fully describe. For Ethan, the path was clear now, not defined by wealth or status, but by a legacy of love, dignity, and purpose. The Grace and Dignity Foundation continued to thrive, attracting the attention of organizations and communities beyond their city. What had started as a modest effort was now recognized as a model for improving working conditions and dignity in the labor sector, especially for workers who often went unseen. Ethan marveled at how far they had come. He saw firsthand the difference they were making. Workers who once struggled now had access to fair wages, financial literacy programs, and educational opportunities for their children. Grace became a well-known figure within the foundation, a symbol of quiet resilience, her story inspiring countless people who felt forgotten by society. One day, an invitation arrived from a national workers' rights conference. Ethan, Grace, and James were invited to speak, an opportunity to share their journey on a larger platform and showcase their mission to leaders and advocates from around the country. It was a moment that cemented the foundation's place in a movement that was changing lives. The night before the conference, the family gathered for a quiet celebration. It wasn't a grand event, but a small dinner with close friends and team members from the foundation who had supported their journey. During the dinner, Grace raised a toast to everyone who has been part of this journey and to the strength that has carried us through. This foundation was born from struggle, but it has given us a new purpose, a reason to keep going. I'm so grateful to each of you for being part of it." The room filled with applause, and Ethan looked around at the faces of people he had come to respect and care for. These were the people who had taught him the true meaning of success. People who understood that greatness was not measured by wealth, but by kindness, integrity, and impact. After the toast, James pulled Ethan aside. "You know," he said, his voice quiet but sincere, "I never thought I'd be standing here with you, doing this. It's strange, but it feels right. Like this is where we were always supposed to end up." Ethan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, his eyes reflecting the pride he felt. "Me too, James. I wouldn't be here without you and Mom. This foundation, this life, isn't just mine. It's ours." The following day, at the conference, Grace took the stage first, her presence commanding a quiet yet powerful respect. She began to speak, her voice steady as she shared her journey as a single mother, a woman who had worked tirelessly to provide a future for her children. "I spent years working in the shadows," she said, her gaze meeting the eyes of those in the audience. "People often think that the work we do, the cleaning, the maintenance, the tasks no one sees, is somehow less important. But I learned that there is dignity in every job. What matters is that we are treated with respect, that we are valued not for our titles, but for our humanity." Her words resonated deeply, drawing applause from the audience, many of whom had lived similar stories. Grace's message wasn't just about her own life. It was a call to action, a reminder that every individual, no matter their position, deserved to be seen and valued. Watching her, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of pride. His mother, once a quiet figure in his life, had become a voice for those who had none. She had given him so much more than he could ever repay, and now she was giving to others in ways that would last far beyond their lifetimes. James, too, found his place within the foundation, working with at-risk youth. He shared his story candidly, speaking to young people who were facing the same challenges he had once faced. His honesty, his willingness to reveal the mistakes he had made and the pain he had endured, made him a trusted mentor. One afternoon, after a workshop with a group of teens, James sat with one of the boys who had struggled to stay on track. The boy looked up at him with admiration, clearly seeing James as someone who understood him. "You think I can make it too?" the boy asked, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. James nodded, a gentle but firm expression on his face. "I know you can. Life might be tough, but you're tougher. You have the strength to choose a different path, just like I did. And I'll be here to help you every step of the way." For James, these conversations weren't just about helping others. They were a part of his own healing. By guiding these young people, he was building a legacy of his own, one of compassion, empathy, and transformation. As the foundation grew, Ethan received proposals from companies wanting to adopt similar models. They wanted guidance on how to provide fair wages and dignified conditions for their workers. The Grace and Dignity Foundation had become a blueprint, setting a new standard that encouraged companies to prioritize people over profits. Ethan knew that this was the beginning of something far greater than he had imagined. By working with these companies, he saw an opportunity to amplify the foundation's impact, to inspire a shift in values across industries. He and his team drafted a set of guidelines that other organizations could use, a roadmap that honored the dignity of all workers. The foundation's influence began to spread, and Ethan realized that his work was creating the kind of legacy he had once dreamed of. But this legacy wasn't built on his own name or achievements. It was built on the sacrifices and resilience of his family, a testament to the strength and courage of his mother, Grace. At the foundation's annual event, Ethan prepared to give a speech reflecting on the journey they had taken together. He stepped onto the stage, looking out at the audience, many of whom had been touched by the foundation's work. Taking a deep breath, he began. "When I started this journey, I thought success meant building something big, something powerful. But I learned that real success is found in the people you lift up along the way, in the lives you change, and in the purpose you find within yourself." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked over at Grace and James, who sat in the front row. "This foundation is not just about my family's story. It's about every family that has worked in silence, every individual who deserves respect and opportunity. It's about honoring the dignity and resilience of those who have kept this world turning, even when no one was watching. The applause was thunderous, a tribute not only to Ethan's journey, but to the message of hope and dignity that the foundation had come to represent. After the event, Ethan, Grace, and James gathered together in a quiet moment of reflection. There was a sense of peace between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. They had each traveled their own difficult path, yet they had found their way back to each other, bound not only by blood, but by a purpose they had built together. Grace looked at her sons, her eyes shining with pride. "You've both given me more than I could have ever asked for. This foundation, this family, it's more than I could have dreamed." Ethan reached over, holding her hand gently. "Mom, everything I am is because of you. This legacy, it's yours too. We're all here because of the strength you taught us." James nodded, his voice filled with gratitude. "You taught us how to be resilient, how to keep going no matter what. This foundation is our way of saying thank you." They sat together, their hearts full, knowing that they had built something enduring, something that would continue to uplift others long after they were gone. Years passed, and the Grace and Dignity Foundation continued to grow, expanding its programs and outreach, inspiring other organizations across the nation to follow its example. Ethan became known not for his corporate success, but for his commitment to fairness and humanity, a legacy rooted in the values his mother had instilled in him. James, now a respected mentor, devoted himself to guiding young people who were searching for purpose. His own life had transformed, and he used his story to show others that change was always possible, no matter where they started. As for Grace, she remained a quiet but powerful presence within the foundation, a reminder that true dignity and strength often go unseen but are nonetheless enduring. She watched her sons with pride, knowing that the values she had lived by were now changing lives on a much larger scale. Years after the Grace and Dignity Foundation's launch, the impact of the Cole family's efforts continued to ripple through communities. The foundation had become a beacon of hope for countless individuals, a place where people found dignity, support, and a path forward. Ethan often reflected on how his life had transformed not just his own, but those of the people his foundation touched, each story adding depth to his journey. One autumn afternoon, Ethan made his way to a small local park, the very park where he and Grace had shared countless afternoons during his childhood. It was now one of his favorite places to visit, a peaceful spot where he felt connected to his roots and the journey that had brought him here. Today, he wasn't alone. Grace, now older but still vibrant and active, walked beside him, her steps sure and steady. James had joined them as well, his face calm and content, a far cry from the anger and pain that had once been his constant companions. Together, the three of them strolled in comfortable silence, letting the cool breeze and the sounds of families in the park fill the quiet. They paused by a bench, and Grace took a seat, looking out over the children playing nearby. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "when I used to bring you here as a boy, I would dream about the future. I wanted you to have a life full of opportunities, a life where you wouldn't have to struggle the way we did. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but more than that, I'm proud of who you've become." Ethan placed his hand over his mother's, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I owe everything to you, Mom. I finally understand what it means to carry on your legacy not through wealth or success, but through kindness and integrity. I hope we've honored you with everything we've built." Grace smiled, her gaze filled with warmth. "You have, Ethan. Both of you." James nodded, looking at his mother with affection and respect. "We may have had our rough patches, but I think we've finally found our way. And now, thanks to you, we're giving others a chance to do the same." Ethan and Grace shared a knowing look, the bond between them strengthened by years of resilience and sacrifice. And though words were few, there was an unspoken understanding that filled the air, a mutual respect and love that had grown stronger through each hardship, each triumph, and each step forward. As they left the park, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The Grace and Dignity Foundation was no longer simply a project. It was a living testament to the power of family, a reminder that people could rise from even the most difficult circumstances to build lives of purpose and dignity. The foundation continued to expand, reaching cities across the nation. It provided scholarships for children of working-class families, hosted mentorship programs, and became a model of fair treatment and respect for workers. People from all walks of life came to know Grace's story, and her strength and humility became the heart of the foundation. Ethan, James, and Grace each found fulfillment in their own roles. Ethan led the foundation with a focus on integrity and compassion, while James became a mentor to youth at risk of falling through the cracks, guiding them with honesty and empathy. Grace remained the foundation's guiding spirit, her story inspiring everyone who crossed her path. In time, other companies began to adopt the foundation's model, implementing fair labor practices and support systems for their employees. Grace's legacy had spread far beyond her own family, transforming lives and uplifting countless others. Years later, as Ethan looked back on his journey, he felt a quiet pride in what they had achieved, not just the foundation, but the relationships they had mended, the lives they had uplifted, and the purpose they had found together. The legacy of the Cole family was no longer one of wealth or ambition, but one of compassion, resilience, and love. One evening, at a foundation gala, Ethan took a moment to observe the people gathered around him. Workers, advocates, families all there because they believed in a shared vision of dignity and support. Grace stood beside him, her face radiant with joy, while James laughed with a group of young people he was mentoring. The Grace and Dignity Foundation had become more than Ethan could have ever imagined. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to what was possible when people chose love over pride, humility over ambition, and family over self-interest. As he looked around, Ethan knew he had finally found a peace that came from knowing his life had true meaning, a peace that came from the legacy he had built, not alone, but alongside the family he had once taken for granted. And as the years passed, the Grace and Dignity Foundation would continue to grow, carrying forward the values of love, dignity, and unity that the Cole family had come to cherish. The story of Ethan, Grace, and James had become one of redemption, resilience, and renewal. They had each walked their own path, facing challenges and heartbreaks, but ultimately found purpose and fulfillment in lifting others. The Grace and Dignity Foundation was not just an organization. It was a testament to their love, their courage, and their shared commitment to making the world a better place for all. As they embraced this legacy, they knew that the most powerful success in life came not from what you achieved for yourself, but from what you could build with and for those you loved. And in that legacy, they found true triumph. If you found Ethan, Grace, and James's journey as inspiring as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Every story we share is crafted to remind us of the power of resilience, the importance of family, and the strength found in pursuing purpose. Don't miss our next inspiring tale. Join us as we explore more stories that uplift, challenge, and celebrate the beauty of human connections. Subscribe now and be part of our community. Let's keep building legacies that last.